The Amani were not merely shadows between trees. They built. They ruled. They remembered. Their world was not made of marble halls and glowing spires. It was made of stone temples, carved masks, blood oaths, sacred groves, and stories spoken under stars. A people does not need elven towers to be civilized. A people does not need golden roads to have a kingdom. Sometimes a kingdom is a drumbeat. Sometimes it is a shrine hidden so deep in the forest that only the faithful remember the way. Sometimes it is a child learning the names of the dead.
We had kings before their banners. We had priests before their wards. We had roads before their maps. We had laws written not on paper, but in blood, stone, and oath.
And perhaps that is why so much was forgotten. Paper survives in archives. Stone survives as ruins. But memory survives only if someone is left to speak it. Hatred does not always begin as hatred. Sometimes it begins as a lesson. A child sitting by a fire, an elder pointing into the dark, a story told with trembling hands. At that river we stood. Under that tower our dead are buried. Beyond that road your grandmother was born. And there, where the lights shine now, was ours. Again and again, until memory becomes duty. Duty becomes anger. Anger becomes inheritance.
Do not forget the first path. Do not forget the old stones. Do not forget who named the forest before the spires rose. Do not forget.
And if they will not listen,
then memory will find a sharper tongue.
That is the danger. A people can keep memory alive and still lose wisdom. Because if every child is taught only what was taken, one day they may forget to ask what should be saved. This tale is an unofficial fan-made speculative story created for entertainment, discussion, and creative exploration. All referenced characters, places, peoples, settings, and lore belong to their respective rights holders. This story is not official history. It is not intended to replace, alter, or claim ownership over any established lore. Any resemblance to real people, real places, or real events is coincidental. Thank you for listening, friends. May your cup stay full, and may the old stories find honest ears. And now, a deeper night approaches. Old borders tremble, old powers stir, old wounds begin to ache again. That is what darkness does. It reaches not for what is strong, but for what is unresolved. A people who feel forgotten, a kingdom that fears being destroyed, a forest full of buried truth. These are not small things. They are doors. And if the coming night whispers through those doors, it will not need to invent war. It will only need to remind each side of the version of history that hurts the most.
They forgot you. Make them remember.
They hated you. Prepare the wards.
There. That is the trap. Not memory. Memory is not the enemy. The trap is memory without mercy. Think of Suleiman. Not as a battlefield. Not as a place where outsiders came seeking victory. Not as a ruin to be cleared. Think of it as a heart. A living heart. Stone steps worn by generations, masks carved by hands that knew exactly which ancestors they honored. Fires lit not for war, but for ceremony. Drums sounded not only to threaten enemies, but to call the people together. Every place becomes smaller when its enemies describe it. A capital becomes a fortress. A temple becomes a target. A people become a problem. But before Zul'Aman was a warning to outsiders, it was a home to those within.
Here we spoke to the old ones. Here we crowned the war leaders. Here we mourned. Here we promised the dead they would not vanish.
And perhaps that promise is still echoing. So before Quel'Thalas, there was not nothing. There was a people who knew the forest by older names. There were roads beneath roots, shrines beneath vines, graves beneath the places others later called beautiful. There were stories, and when the towers rose, those stories did not vanish. They changed shape. Some became songs, some became warnings, some became rage. And some are still waiting in the old stones, hoping someone will listen without reaching for a blade. Maybe that is the tragedy of the Amani. Not that they remembered, but that no one heard them until their memory had already become war. Before Quel'Thalas had towers, the forest had memory, and the Amani never stopped hearing it. So let us speak plainly. The Amani were more than enemies. They were not born from hatred. They were not simply waiting in the forest to become someone else's nightmare. They had a world, and much of that world was taken, changed, renamed, or forgotten. That matters. But understanding that does not excuse every war cry. It does not excuse every raid. It does not excuse every innocent life taken. It does not turn vengeance into justice. The truth does not need us to make monsters into saints. It only asks us to stop pretending monsters are born without history. Understanding the wound does not bless the weapon, but ignoring the wound only makes the weapon easier to raise. There is a kind of conquest that begins before the sword. It begins with a word. Empty. Empty forest, empty land, empty wilderness. A place waiting to be improved, a place waiting to be claimed, a place waiting to become useful. But land is rarely empty to the people buried beneath it. And if you call a place empty long enough, eventually your children will believe it.
We found beauty and shaped it. We brought order to wild places. We raised roads, towers, and sanctuaries. We made a home where our people could live.
You did not bring order. You brought forgetting. You gave new names to old wounds and called the silence peace.
To conquer a people, you take their land. To erase them, you convince the next generation that the land was empty. When we speak of land, we often think of borders, lines on a map, claims, territory, resources, strategic ground. But to an ancient people, land is more than soil. It is where your dead sleep. It is where your children become adults. It is where your stories can point to a tree, a hill, a river bend and say, there, that is where it happened. What happens when those places are renamed? What happens when the path to your ancestor's grave becomes a road patrolled by strangers? What happens when your sacred grove becomes the shadow of another people's tower? What happens when your children ask what stood there before, and the world answers, nothing important?
Were we not important?
We were. That is why you must remember. That is why you must never let their songs be the only songs.
Now, we must not become unfair in the other direction. The elves did not see themselves as thieves. Many likely saw themselves as survivors. They had lost much, They had wandered far. They needed shelter, unity, and a future. To them, Quel'Thalas was hope. And hope is a powerful thing. Hope can build wonders. Hope can hold a wounded people together. But hope can also blind, because survival does not make every choice innocent. A beautiful kingdom can still cast a shadow, and a people fleeing pain can still cause pain when they arrive. We needed a home.
So did we.
And there it is. 2 peoples, 2 homes, 1 forest. Now step away from the elven archive. Leave the polished hall. Leave the scrolls. Leave the golden ink. Walk into the trees. Not the trees as outsiders saw them, the trees as the Amani knew them. Every bend in the river had a story, every stone had a warning, every hill had a name spoken by elders long before elven tongues shaped new ones. This was not wilderness, it was home.
This path was where your mother carried water. This stone was where your grandfather sharpened his spear. This hollow was where the dead were sung into the earth. That tree remembers your bloodline better than any crown.
And the towers, Elder, the bright ones beyond the river.
Those came later. Do not let their light make you think they came first.
Some places remember differently than people do. People choose. They polish, they defend, they hide the parts that shame them. But the land keeps everything. The road and the grave beneath it, the tower and the root it crushed, the song and the silence after. Maybe that is why the old forest feels uneasy, not because it hates the elves, not because it belongs only to the Amani, but because it has heard every version of the story and knows which parts each side leaves out.
The trees remember our names.
The towers remember our dead.
Then perhaps the forest is not asking who suffered. Perhaps it is asking who will finally tell the whole truth. Come closer, friends. The fire is still warm, and this story is not finished. Last time, we asked a dangerous question. What if the Amani were right about Quel'Thalas? Not right in every blade, not right in every war, not right in the hatred that grew from old grief, but perhaps right about the wound. Tonight, we go deeper, because before we judge what the Amani became, we must ask what they were. Not a raid, not a warband, not a warning shouted from the edge of elven walls. A people, a kingdom of memory, a forest of ancestors, an empire that time did not destroy all at once, but slowly, stone by stone, name by name, story by story.
After long wandering, the exiled elves came north. They sought refuge. They sought peace. They sought a place where their people might endure. In the northern forests, beneath radiant skies, and among lands rich with promise, they founded Quel'Thalas. There they built a kingdom of beauty and discipline. There they raised towers of light. There they shaped the wilderness into a home. And there, against savage foes, they stood.
There is truth in that telling. The elves were wanderers, exiles, a people searching for a future after losing the one they knew. It is easy to forget that. To the elves, the northern forest was not simply conquest, it was survival. A place to plant roots after being torn from old soil. A place to say, Here, here we will begin again. And there is something deeply understandable about that. But understanding one beginning does not erase the ending it caused for someone else. This is where sorrow becomes dangerous. The Amani remembered. They remembered with songs. They remembered with masks. They remembered with stones. They remembered with names. But eventually, they remembered with spears.
If they build on our bones, we will tear down their walls. If they sing over our dead, we will answer with drums. If they call us monsters, then let them fear the shape they gave us.
No, that is where the wound poisons itself. Because pain may explain the spear, but it does not cleanse the blood from it. A true wound does not make every act righteous. A stolen memory does not justify every cruelty committed in its name. And yet, if we only condemn the spear and never speak of the wound, we make certain the next child will pick it up again. Every kingdom has a beginning, a first stone, a first banner, a first song sung over walls not yet stained by war. But sometimes, one people's beginning is another people's ending. Before Quel'Thalas rose in gold and crimson, before its towers pierced the morning light, before the elves called the forest beautiful, the forest already had names. It had paths, it had shrines, it had graves, it had memory.
They say they found a home. We say they found ours.
Tonight, we do not begin with Silvermoon. We begin before it, before the elves, before the maps were redrawn, before the story was polished enough to forget the dirt beneath it. Tonight, we ask what the Amani were, before they were only remembered as enemies.